Let's talk about the trolley problem. You've probably heard of something like this before. There's a trolley that's speeding down its tracks out of control, and there are 5 people tied to the tracks directly in front of it. You're standing at a lever, and if you pull the lever, it will switch the trolley onto another track that only has one person tied to it. The choice is between doing nothing and letting 5 people die in the process, but not being directly responsible for those deaths, or pulling the lever and killing one person, but you killed that one person. A lot of people within the Smash community seem to want to stand by the lever and just kind of hit the default dance and laugh at the people tied to the tracks. The trolley problem is an allegory for philosophical viewpoints. What do you think is more important, the intent or the principle behind your actions, or the consequences of them? To me, the answer is clear. I think of myself as a consequentialist or a utilitarian. The most important thing to consider when analyzing our actions is the effect that they have. Minimizing harm and maximizing happiness is what we should be aiming for, and this is the lens through which I view things like community misconduct, which is an issue that's important to me as a Super Smash Bros. Tournament organizer. With that in mind, I'd like to talk about the cases of Ally and Zero, two of the most prominent cases of misconduct within the community. We'll start with Ally, a top Smash Ultimate player from Montreal, Canada, who was banned for life from the Super Smash Bros. Community for his relationship with a 16-year-old as a 28-year-old, as well as unwanted sexual advances and emotional abuse. I can't believe I still have to say this, but this really was a cut and dry case. Some of the information that pertains to it isn't publicly available because it involves a minor, but I encourage any organizers who have access to the decision made by the conduct panel to go back and read it. And for any tournament organizers who don't have access to it, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Ally was given a unanimous lifetime ban by people who reviewed evidence and personal statements from the parties involved. His appeal to lift or lessen that ban was also unanimously rejected. This was all done by people who know far more about the case than anyone on Twitter claiming it was okay because the Canadian age of consent is 16. That's true no matter what criticisms you might have of the conduct panel's process, and no major TOs have come out against the ban. But enter Z, a Montreal tournament organizer. Ally's lifetime ban was handed down on July 4th, 2019, and by January of 2020, Z was already letting him back at tournaments. In a tweet from March of 2021, Z would claim that Ally had gone to therapy, rehabilitated, and returned to being an upstanding member of Montreal's Smash community. Disappointingly, Z has faced very little backlash for flying in the face of the community consensus on this. In fact, a few thousand people clicked the little heart on that tweet. The only argument I've ever heard, aside from the head-ass take that Ally didn't actually do anything wrong, is that everyone deserves a second chance. On its face, that seems reasonable. I agree with the principle of restorative justice or rehabilitative justice in most cases. But in the Smash community, this kind of appeal to a vague principle without understanding or considering the consequences behind it can be disastrous. First, I'd like to talk about the problem with giving Ally carte blanche to return as long as his therapist says it's okay. In that July 4th, 2019 decision, one panel member notes, in interviewing Ally, he expressed only concern for himself, no remorse, and remains adamant that the panel is being unfair despite our concrete proof. I don't know about you, but if he came back in January after saying that sort of stuff, that seems to be the most effective 6 months of therapy in human history. I'm not a mind reader, but I think it's worth considering the possibility that Ally was just doing whatever was the most expedient thing for him to be able to inch his way back into the community. And saying that Ally deserves a second chance assumes a lot of things about his mental state that I'm not comfortable assuming. Also, this wasn't Ally's first offense. A former partner before his relationship with a minor accused him of unwanted sexual advances and sexual assault. He also used threatening suicide as a form of emotional abuse. As I mentioned, these were factored into his ban. Does he deserve a third chance? I think it makes much more sense to analyze the effect of Ally coming back and the effect of banning Ally and weigh those things against each other. And I do think that there are negative consequences to banning somebody. There is a lot of self-worth tied up in one's association to a community if they're very involved in it, and a ban can be deeply hurtful to that person, especially when there's a lot of public shaming behind it. It has to be said, though, that the Smash community is a privilege and not a right. Being banned comes with a similar standard to being fired from a job. It can be less than a crime, but it should be more than calling someone a shithead for stealing your chicken salad sandwich out of the refrigerator when it had a post-it note clearly on it that said, "Dave's do not eat." In both cases, the reason to let someone go is to prevent further harm from happening, or I would argue to prevent people from feeling unsafe within the space. First is the chance of direct harm. It's hard to gauge exactly the risk in allowing someone with a history of abusive behavior to exist within the scene, but I think we can all agree that it's an increased one. As an organizer, I would find it impossible to allow someone like Ally at my tournament under just about any circumstance. As George W. Bush once said, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, can't get fooled again." If somebody punched me in the face at work, I would definitely want them fired because I don't want to be punched in the face again. I don't really care whether they go to jail or not. I would just prefer not to share a cubicle with a known face puncher anymore. Now let's talk about the importance of creating a sense of safety in a community. And I know that someone in the comments is already foaming at the mouth, typing about how SJWs are ruining Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, but if you've been paying attention, you should know that my arguments are ultimately based on outcomes. Allowing people with histories of abusive behavior to remain in the community hurts just about everyone. Many have spoken out about their stories of abuse and why they would feel unsafe sharing the space with their abusers or with people who did similar things. This is a definitive harm to the community. If you don't ban abusers, you effectively ban the people who have been subjected to their abuse, or people who have been subjected to abuse outside of the community, or really anyone who sympathizes with victims of abuse. Not to mention the children whose parents are faced with the possibility of taking their child to a tournament where the known pedophile hangs out, or a phebophile, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. Eventually, if that continues, all you'll be left with are the people who are okay with allowing that harm to take place so that they can watch their favorite disgraced gamer play. I don't want the Smash community to be insular and sycophantic, and neither should you. The Smash community will outlive Ally's involvement in it. What it might not outlive is a wave of returning offenders, and we can pull the lever now and ban them, or we can let it happen, and we all suffer. The reason I think it's important to make these arguments more clear is that the Smash community's discourse on them has been historically really bad, and EE's now deleted interview of Zero is a prime example of that. Zero has admitted to soliciting nude photos from a minor and showing porn to another minor, and while the conduct panel has dissolved since the Ally decision, it's generally assumed that he's going to be widely banned from Smash tournaments going forward. In March of 2021, Zero attempted suicide. It's clear, again, that the psychological effects of losing one's community, of losing one's support system, of being ostracized, of being publicly shamed, can have devastating effects on someone. I genuinely hope that Zero finds himself in a more stable place. I think he needs support. I think he deserves support. This is a legitimate issue that deserves more attention, but I am encouraged that there is some good work being done in our little corner of the world as gamers to help. I think that Healthy Gamer and Dr. K have done a lot of really great work in destigmatizing mental health in a space that's really dedicated to anyone that needs help, but I don't think that every space can be like that. I don't think that the Smash community can be like that if we want the community to remain inclusive. That's the nuance that people are missing when they talk about Zero coming back to the community in the same breath as wishing him well. There is a clear difference between keeping somebody away from a community because of wrongdoing and wishing them harm. It was irresponsible for EE to use his large Smash community platform to give Zero a softball interview. Zero is given the stage for a half an hour to talk about the ways in which the situation has been difficult for him without being pressed on his actions in any meaningful way. EE went on the defensive on Twitter, offering a slew of lever-ignoring arguments. While my intent was not to say that Zero should come back, or that wasn't the purpose of this video, that of course is all irrelevant. EE failed to consider the consequences of giving Zero a platform like that. The comment section of that video was full of people rejoicing the triumphant return of Zero. EE is one of the loudest voices in the room, and by offering no criticism to Zero, he gave him a tacit endorsement. The public discourse in situations like this has an impact within the Smash community. VGBC erroneously unbanned Captain Zack, flying in the face of a code of conduct decision after some expressed an opinion that the ban was too severe. On a related note, whether or not you believe Nairo should be unbanned, it's hard to imagine 2GG's decision to not ban him going forward wasn't influenced by everyone and their mom putting hashtag unban Nairo in their bio. A lot of people pulled out pitchforks against the conduct panel as well to voice their displeasure over decisions like the Ally one. And the lack of a collective TO platform has sort of left us scattered to the wind when it comes to things like Z making some egregiously bad decisions, and Omni tournaments in Louisiana letting Captain Zach come back to tournaments, and both of these tournament organizers running local tournaments at the height of the COVID pandemic, sometimes illegally. The Smash community has no institutional support when it comes to conduct, and that means that it heavily relies on individual tournament organizers making good decisions and players trusting them to make those decisions. There seems to be a storm of bad takes jeopardizing this relationship at all times, and unfortunately, the people with the largest platforms in the community tend either to be silent or outright wrong on these issues. You know, when Technicals is the leading voice on the subject, just fucking yikes, man.
Mikey, you idiot. Don't you know it's all just bad-faced dumbasses who will jump at any chance to ignore the wrongdoing of the person on the end of their most cherished parasocial relationship? They would let the trolley run over 100 people before it bumps their favorite.
Oh, cool. Back to blocking every Ultimate player who disagrees with me on Twitter.